Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today we're going to look at this grocery store orchid. Its name is Phalaenopsis Cherry. Cherry is a very interesting orchid. First of all, I did not buy this orchid for its flower because it actually has a lot more interesting aspect to its leaves. It has a little bit of modeling going on its leaf, and that's really the reason why I bought this orchid. Let's go back in time to 2018, Q4 2018, mid-October 2018. It had finished the blooms that I purchased that came with the orchid from the store, and at the time it was growing a new leaf and root production was going on as it was in bloom when I first bought it, and it was doing really well. I didn't do too much to it. I didn't even repot this orchid after it finished its bloom, which I'll kind of go into a little bit more detail why I didn't do that and the logic behind it. But you can tell it has a little bit of modeling, and that is really the reason why I bought this orchid. So end of 2018, this orchid started to shoot out another new spike. And at the time, you can see here, the roots, some of the roots were growing directly out of the cup, and that was because I put this orchid into this 16-ounce cup, and I usually just leave it in there. I use that outer cup as a sort of a semi-divider in case there's any bugs or anything. It doesn't prevent bug problem completely if it had bugs, which this orchid didn't have and is pretty healthy. But if there is, you at least create somewhat of a divider, so you can somewhat contain it. It helps you contain any potential bug problem if there is any, but it's not 100% proof. But I primarily use this outer cup as a cup that I soak this orchid in, whatever solution. It could be pure water, which I use at least once a month, or it could be water with fertilizer in it, which I use quarter strength, 25% strength fertilizer. Once a month, I may decide to use Bloom Booster, but primarily it's nitrogen based fertilizer for root and leaf growth, and usually Bloom Booster is only used when I see fly spikes emerges. This orchid last year, I remember it also had quite a bit of bloom, and this year the bloom count, if I'm correct, I think it's pretty much comparable. But this orchid, what's interesting was when it was shooting out a spike, the spike direction was going parallel with the leaf. So in order for this orchid to look better, right? Because I like to look at the leaves and the flowers at the same time. So I actually turned this orchid halfway through its spike development. I actually turned it 90 degrees, and that's why in some of the photos you actually see the spike was coming out along the leaf direction, but then eventually it kind of turned because I wanted to be able to see the flowers, but then with the leaves growing to its sides. When I face the flower. So anyway, they always grow toward the source of the light, flower spikes and also leaf as well, and that's why if you turn the orchid around, the new leaf, like 180 degrees, the new leaf would still grow toward the source of light source. Anyway, so this orchid, I didn't repot it after all the flowers finished for the first time, because I looked at the media. It looked pretty okay to me. It's a mixture of bark chips and moss. And I didn't see any kind of potential pest. Sometimes it's a bit of a gamble because I've had this Oncidium that didn't have any pest issue for, quite a few months or a year. But then all of a sudden I had 2 snails. And get this, I've had that orchid inside on a third floor in my grow space, right? So it's quite far away from the outside, but all of a sudden you had two small snails. So it's never really 100%, right? But for this orchid, I didn't repot because I didn't see any potential issue, no root rot issue, no broken down media. So I didn't want to repot because when you repot, I mean, just think of it: your orchid was purchased, and you bring it to your home, and then it had to immediately try to adjust to the new environment. But then after the flowers are done, unless there really is a good reason for you to repot it, otherwise, if you did it, right, it had to adjust to the new environment, and then the new media, the new container, if you change a different size of container. And during the process, if you somehow damage the root or stress out the orchid, then you're potentially setting back this orchid. And that's why a lot of my Chinese subscribers are asking the question, how come my orchid just doesn't bloom the second year or the third year? Then I kind of asked them some questions. I probed a little bit further, and I realized, you know what? You probably didn't need to repot it because you didn't really give me a good reason. You didn't see a good reason to repot, and you did it, and you didn't even know if you did a good job or not. And so a lot of the times it's not so much about the care during the year that it doesn't bloom, right? During the non-blooming year, it's not necessarily the care that was not correct or something. It might have been because the orchid was set back after you were, during the repot process, essentially. So this orchid, I didn't do anything, right? And then I just let it wait until winter comes, the nighttime temperature drops. Sure enough, it produced another flower spike. And then I added bloom booster into the water that I was giving to this orchid. And then boom, it's blooming again. So sometimes you don't really have to repot the orchid right away after the flowers are done. You have to really decide and look at the media, look at the overall health. I mean, it does come with a little bit of experience. It takes time to be able to have that experience to say this orchid really needs this versus a repot. So try not to always want to have the urge to repot an orchid just because it's finished blooming. And I've seen a lot of people who would ask the question, hey, this media is totally broken down, and then I see the photo and it actually is not. It's just darker in color because it's probably saturated with water. And how do you really know it's broken down unless you're really smelling a lot of like rotty smell, mildew? But that's sometimes really just because it's too much water. It may not have anything to do with the quality of the bark chips or the age of the bark or media like moss. So you have to take a lot of elements together and use your experience and your understanding of that particular orchid to really make that judgment call. But I see a lot of people who just really want to repot their orchids for no good reason. So maybe that's why a lot of their orchids don't bloom, because they didn't need to be repotted, and then they're somewhat disturbed and maybe even set back. That's probably the biggest reason that that I see with my Chinese subscribers non-blooming orchids. But back to this orchid, right? The reason I put it in this cup is because, like I said, to have that divider. But then when I need to water it, it's kind of hard, right? So the first flower spike, I purposely kept it for longer. I didn't cut it from the base or, after the first node or right above the first node. I think I might have kept 2 nodes because I want to have an extra dry flower spike for me to pull up this orchid when I need to. That's my personal preference, my personal trick, because I grow this orchid in a cup and I really don't want to use my hand to pull the leaf of the orchid, even if I use my entire hand to lift this orchid up by both sides. Still, I mean, having a dry flower spike is just that much more convenient to handle this orchid, so I don't have to touch the roots or the leaves, and it's easy for me to drain the water as well. And speaking of water, the water amount usually is just about maybe a quarter, like 25% at the bottom. And once a month, when I use just pure water, I do increase the water level to about 80% of the cup, the inner cup. Otherwise, I use 25% of the water at the bottom and just let the wicking effect to does its magic. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with this orchid this year, and hopefully next year this orchid would also give us more bloom to enjoy. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!